They say the most dangerous person in a burning building is the one who knows the exits. 29 minutes ago, they stripped my security badge and tossed me into the Seattle rain for a 19-year-old intern. But as their multi-billion-dollar system collapses, trapping the board and VIP investors in a digital nightmare, they are realizing a terrifying truth. They just fired the only person holding the keys. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. We want to take a moment to sincerely thank you for your incredible support. But unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to operate and forcing us to halt all new video uploads here for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning our operations to Patreon. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us there to hear exclusive, true revenge stories that are longer, far more detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors bringing the characters to life. Content we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join our community right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description and comments below. Now, let us begin today's story and meet our protagonist, Gemma Price. The fluorescent lights of Vanguard Horizon Tech always had a way of draining the life out of you, but today, they felt particularly interrogative. I am 32 years old, and for the last 8 years, I have been the lead system architect for this sprawling virtual reality empire based in the heart of Seattle. I built their core infrastructure from the ground up. I practically lived in the server rooms, sacrificing weekends and relationships to build a multi-billion-dollar digital world. So, when the head of human resources materialized at my desk without a prior email, a Slack message, or even a calendar invite, a cold knot formed immediately in my stomach. "Gemma, we need you in conference room B, now," he said. I followed him, the familiar hum of the open-plan office fading into a stifling, suffocating silence as the frosted glass door clicked shut behind me. Marcus Sterling, our chief technology officer, was already sitting at the long mahogany table. He did not look up from his tablet. He did not offer a seat. He simply slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the table. It was a termination notice. "Effective immediately, your employment at Vanguard Horizon is terminated," Marcus said, his voice as sterile and emotionless as an automated prompt. I stared at the paper, the words blurring together under the harsh lighting. "Excuse me? Are you out of your mind, Marcus? We launched the new investor environment in less than 2 hours." Marcus finally looked up, adjusting his expensive designer glasses with terrifying calm. "Company policy. Gemma, we recently conducted an internal audit of our engineering staff. You do not possess the Level 4 cyberspace coding certification. It is a mandatory requirement for lead architects handling investor-facing architecture." My jaw tightened. I knew the employee handbook inside out, because I helped write the technical protocols for it. "There is no such thing as a Level 4 cyberspace certification. You made that up." "Check the employee portal," he replied smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair. "The policy was updated exactly 15 minutes ago. You are out of compliance. We have to let you go." The sheer audacity of it left me temporarily breathless. A fake certification, conjured out of thin air, just to bypass my ironclad employment contract. But the real insult was yet to come, as I raised my voice to contest this blatant corporate assassination. The heavy office door squeaked open. In walked a girl who looked like she should be worrying about her freshman midterms, not stepping into an executive suite. It was Lily. She was 19 years old, a completely inexperienced intern, and more importantly, she was Marcus Sterling's biological niece. My shock instantly metastasized into a blinding, white-hot fury. Lily stood trembling in the corner of the room, looking like a terrified deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. Her eyes darted wildly between me and her uncle. She was clutching a massive binder of my proprietary source code to her chest, her knuckles entirely white. I noticed with a bitter pang of irony that she was holding the binder completely upside down. She had absolutely no idea what was happening, nor did she possess even a fraction of the intellect required to comprehend the digital leviathan I had built. "You are replacing me with an intern," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You are handing the keys to a billion-dollar platform to a teenager who cannot even hold a manual right side up? Marcus stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. Lily is highly motivated and perfectly compliant with our new policies. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your car. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your personal belongings. There was no argument to be had. The corporate machine had already chewed me up, and now it was spitting me out onto the pavement. The security guards, men I used to buy coffee for on Tuesday mornings, stood on either side of me like I was a sudden, highly dangerous threat. I packed my coffee mug, a framed photo, and a handful of pens into a cardboard box. 8 years of unmatched dedication, all reduced to a pathetic cardboard box and a humiliating, silent march through the main lobby. I stepped out of the sliding glass doors and into the unrelenting Seattle downpour. The freezing rain soaked right through my coat as I walked to the far end of the parking lot. I threw my box into the passenger seat of my SUV, slamming the heavy door shut to block out the roaring sound of the storm. I slumped into the driver's seat, gripping the leather steering wheel until my hands ached, the sheer injustice of it all threatening to suffocate me. Before I could even reach for the ignition, the screen of my phone lit up in the dim, gray light of the car. It was an automated calendar alert. 30 minutes. In exactly 30 minutes. Vanguard Horizon Tech was scheduled to begin the biggest virtual reality project launch of the decade. Wall Street investors, powerful tech journalists, and VIP board members were currently putting on their headsets, preparing to dive into a highly complex digital ecosystem that I wrote line by line. Every algorithm, every safety failsafe, every intricate loop of code came directly from my brain. And Marcus had just handed the ignition switch to a 19-year-old girl. I did not start the car. I just sat there in the cold, pounding rain, staring at the glowing neon sign of the corporate headquarters, waiting for the inevitable disaster to strike. The heavy drops of the Seattle rain hammered against the roof of my car, acting as a rhythmic countdown to the inevitable. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 22 minutes after I had been escorted out of the lobby, my phone sitting on the center console began to vibrate violently. It was not a single buzz. It was a frantic, continuous seizure of notifications. I picked up the device. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of blazing red alert banners. Server node failure. Critical architecture collapse. Haptic feedback overload. In their massive rush to throw me out, human resources had forgotten to coordinate with the Central Information Technology Department to completely sever my administrative privileges. My master credentials were still pinging the network, giving me a front-row seat to the apocalypse I was witnessing in raw data. I swiped open the diagnostic dashboard, and a cold smile crept onto my face as I read the cascading error logs. Error code 742. A total sequence lockdown. I knew exactly what had happened. Lily had tried to initiate the boot protocol, but the launch sequence for a virtual reality environment of this magnitude was not a simple switch you could just flip. It required a delicate, multi-tiered authentication process, balancing thermal loads and neural link synchronization across dozens of high-capacity servers. Lily, clutching that binder upside down, had bypassed the secondary safety node and force-started the main engine. The system, interpreting this brute force command as a catastrophic hostile breach, did exactly what I had programmed it to do in the event of an attack. It locked the core source code inside a hardened digital vault and threw the entire server farm into a high-level security loop. It was a digital fortress slamming its gates shut, and the timing could not have been worse. Inside the grand presentation hall on the 45th floor, dozens of Wall Street billionaires, venture capitalists, and prime board members were currently strapped into our prototype sensory immersion chairs. They were wearing our flagship haptic feedback suits and ultra-high-definition visors. They were supposed to be experiencing a serene, flawlessly rendered digital paradise. Instead, they were suddenly plunged into a collapsing, hyper-accelerated nightmare. The data on my screen painted a horrifying picture. The physics engine was tearing itself apart. The simulated environment was fracturing, causing extreme visual tearing and strobing colors that would immediately induce severe vertigo and sensory shock. Worse yet, they were trapped. The haptic suits were neurologically synced to the users through advanced localized microcurrents. If the system was experiencing a catastrophic crash, simply ripping the headset off or pulling the main power plug was completely out of the question. A sudden disruption in the biometric feedback loop would cause a massive synaptic shock. We were talking about permanent neurological damage, severe seizures, and multi-million-dollar lawsuits for every single person strapped into a chair. They were hostages inside a failing digital dimension, and the walls were caving in. I could picture the absolute pandemonium unfolding in the master control room. The remaining engineering team would be running around like headless chickens, their monitors flashing the same crimson warnings I was looking at. But they were completely powerless. They did not have the architectural map. They did not have the root keys. Most importantly, they did not have the emergency override algorithm. I was the only person on the planet who held that algorithmic sequence in my head. A complex cipher I had designed for exactly this kind of extinction-level event. I knew Marcus was probably losing his mind right now, his perfectly tailored suit soaked in nervous sweat. I imagined him screaming at the junior developers, demanding they crack a mathematical puzzle. They lacked the foundational knowledge to even understand. He had orchestrated my downfall perfectly, only to realize he had thrown away the only parachute on the plane. My phone buzzed again, breaking my train of thought. This time, it was not an automated server warning. It was a secure, encrypted text message from a former colleague, someone on the engineering floor who still had my back. The message read, "Total chaos up here. The investors are screaming inside the rigs. Marcus is panicking. He is actively blaming everything on you. He just told the board of directors that you were bitter about being let go and spitefully installed a destructive virus before you walked out the door." I read the words twice, the audacity of his lie washing over me like ice water. He was not just trying to replace me. He was actively trying to frame me for cyber terrorism to save his own skin. He wanted to send me to federal prison. My thumb hovered over the ignition button of my car. I could start the engine right now. I could put the car in drive, head home, take a hot shower, and let Vanguard Horizon Tech burn to the ground. I could let Marcus face the federal investigators and the wrath of Wall Street alone. But that was too easy. That was not justice. I pulled my hand away from the ignition. I reached over and adjusted the climate control, letting the warm air wash over my freezing hands. I connected my phone to the car audio system and put on a smooth, slow jazz instrumental track. I leaned my seat back, closed my eyes for a brief second, and listened to the rain battering the windshield. I was not going anywhere. I sat there in the quiet comfort of my vehicle, smiling into the dark, and patiently waited for the inevitable moment when the panic behind those towering glass doors would spill out into the parking lot. They were going to come crawling, and I was going to make them bleed. The smooth saxophone notes filling my car were suddenly drowned out by the harsh, desperate slapping of hands against wet glass. I turned my head slowly. There, standing in the torrential downpour, was Richard, the chief executive officer of Vanguard Horizon. Just 45 minutes ago, he was probably standing at a mahogany podium, adjusting his silk tie and preparing to take credit for my life's work. Now, his expensive Italian suit was plastered to his shivering frame, and his perfectly styled hair was plastered across his forehead. His face was entirely devoid of color, resembling a man who had just looked over the edge of a sheer cliff and felt gravity pulling him forward. He slammed his palms against my driver's side window again, his mouth moving frantically, but the thick, soundproofed glass in the heavy rain reduced his shouting to pathetic, muffled squeaks. I let him panic for a full 60 seconds. I watched the water stream down his terrified face, committing the image to memory. Then, moving with deliberate, excruciating slowness, I pressed the button on my armrest. The window glided down exactly 2 inches, just enough to let the freezing air and his desperate voice seep into my warm sanctuary. "Gemma, thank God you have not left yet," Richard gasped, his voice cracking violently. He gripped the edge of the slightly open window, his knuckles white, as if he was afraid I would roll it up and trap his fingers. "You have to come back inside right now. It is a total disaster. The main core has locked us out. I took a slow sip from my travel mug, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead on the glowing neon sign of the building. I am sorry, Richard. I am off the clock, permanently, as of about an hour ago. You should really speak to your new lead architect. I hear she is highly motivated. Do not play games with me, Gemma, please, he pleaded, the water running off his nose and splashing onto his chin. The investors are trapped inside the simulation. The haptic feedback loops are surging. 2 of the prime board members are experiencing severe tachycardia. They are threatening us with multi-billion-dollar lawsuits. They have their lawyers on the phone right now. And someone just threatened to call the federal authorities. Marcus cannot fix it. Nobody can fix it. The system is rejecting every override command. That is incredibly unfortunate, I replied, turning my head to look him dead in the eye. But according to the official termination documents resting in that cardboard box right there, Human Resources determined that I do not possess a Level 4 cyberspace coding certification. I am simply unqualified to handle a project of this magnitude. It would be entirely irresponsible of me to touch your servers. Forget the certification, Richard practically screamed over a crack of thunder. Forget Marcus. Forget Human Resources. Whatever you want, you can have it. We will double your salary. We will give you a massive bonus. Just get out of this car and unlock the system before people start dying in those chairs. The raw, unfiltered terror in his eyes confirmed what I already knew. I held all the cards, and the corporate machine was finally choking on its own gears. I reached over to the passenger seat, carelessly shoving the damp cardboard box full of my belongings onto the floorboard. I opened my center console, pulled out a thick leather notebook, and uncapped a black fountain pen. I do not want a bonus, Richard, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the storm like a freshly sharpened blade. I want structural changes, and they are non-negotiable. First, my immediate reinstatement, but not just as lead architect. I am taking the title of Co-Chief Technology Officer. I will have the exact same lateral authority and security clearance as Marcus Sterling. He does not breathe in that server room without my explicit authorization. Richard swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. Done. Consider it done. Second, I continued, writing the terms down on the crisp white paper. I want unrestricted, root-level access to the financial and server audit logs for the past 5 years. Everything, every deleted file, every phantom transaction, every ghost directory. If you try to redact a single line of code, I will walk away. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting back toward the building as if weighing the risk. But another panicked shout from the lobby shattered his resistance. Fine, you have the access. And finally, I said, leaning closer to the 2-inch gap in the window, the 19-year-old intern, Lily, she does not get fired for this disaster. Richard blinked, completely derailed by the demand. What? The girl who caused this? She has to go. Gemma, she stays, I commanded, leaving absolutely no room for debate. In fact, she is no longer an intern. She is now my direct personal assistant. She reports only to me, and nobody else in this company is allowed to give her an assignment or reprimand her, especially Marcus. I tore the sheet of paper out of the notebook. I rolled the window down the rest of the way, ignoring the rain that instantly blew inside and soaked my shoulder. I pushed the door open, forcing Richard to stumble backward into the puddles. I stepped out of the vehicle, standing tall against the wind. I slapped the piece of paper down flat onto the wet, slippery hood of my car and held out my pen to him. Sign it, I demanded. Richard did not bother reading the words. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen, but he managed to scratch a frantic, illegible signature across the bottom of the page, the ink instantly bleeding into the raindrops. I snatched the paper back, folded it neatly, and slid it into the inner pocket of my coat. I locked my car, the sharp beep cutting through the sound of the rain. I did not look back at the shivering chief executive officer. I simply turned and walked toward the towering glass doors of Vanguard Horizon Tech. 30 minutes ago, I was a discarded employee walking the walk of shame. Now, the heavy glass doors slid open for me, and I stepped back into the building not as a servant, but as the absolute master of their digital universe. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the master control room, leaving a trail of cold rainwater on the pristine white floor tiles. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, thick with the scent of overheated electronics and the sharp tang of sheer human panic. Alarms were blaring in a synchronized, chaotic rhythm, casting erratic flashes of crimson light across the faces of a dozen terrified engineers. They were running around the main console, shouting useless commands. But the moment I stepped into the room, a heavy, stunned silence fell over them. I did not break my stride. I walked straight past the rows of frantic junior developers, my wet coat dripping onto the carpet. I locked eyes with Marcus Sterling. He was standing near the central monitor, his face the color of spoiled milk, his mouth hanging slightly open as if he had just seen a ghost. He tried to speak, to assert some kind of authority, but his voice failed him completely. I ignored his existence, stepping around his frozen figure, and approached the command terminal. "Get out of my chair," I said quietly to the senior network administrator sitting at the main console. He scrambled backwards so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. I sat down, pulling the keyboard toward me. The screens in front of me were a blood-red waterfall of critical failure notifications. The core was completely locked. The investors in the hall below were moments away from suffering severe neural shock. I cracked my knuckles, taking one deep breath, and let muscle memory take over. My fingers flew across the mechanical keys, the rapid clacking sounding like machine gun fire in the dead silent room. I bypassed the standard graphical interface and dove straight into the raw command line. I fed the terminal a sequence of algorithmic overrides I had memorized over a year ago. It was a brutal, complex mathematical key designed to force the security loop into a hard reset without severing the biometric connections. "Time to critical overload?" I demanded, my eyes darting across 3 different monitors. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. A voice trembled from the back of the room. I typed faster. I established a localized bypass tunnel, rerouting the power grid away from the haptic feedback suits to stabilize the physical stress on the users. Then, I injected the master decryption cipher directly into the throbbing heart of the security vault. In exactly 3 minutes from the moment I sat down, I hit the enter key for the final command. The blaring alarms abruptly choked and died. The flashing red lights shifted in unison, bathing the room in a calm, steady green glow. The telemetry graphs on the main screen smoothed out into stable, healthy lines. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief echoed through the control room. Someone in the back actually started crying. The investors were safe. The system was breathing again. Marcus stepped forward, suddenly finding his voice, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Well, it is about time. You should count yourself lucky. I convinced Richard to give you a second chance to fix your mess." I did not answer him. I was not looking at him. My eyes were glued to a secondary diagnostic window hidden in the bottom corner of my screen. While the rest of the room was celebrating their survival, my brain was rapidly processing the autopsy report of the crash. Something was entirely wrong. When a user forcefully initiates a boot protocol without the proper sequence, the system generates a very specific, messy error log. It leaves digital shrapnel everywhere. But the logs in front of me were too clean, too intentional. I opened a hidden terminal window and traced the exact moment the security lockdown was triggered. It was not caused by Lily. The 19-year-old intern had indeed pressed the wrong button, but that action had only acted as a tripwire. The real cause of the catastrophic failure was a highly sophisticated, deeply embedded logic bomb. It was a piece of malicious code, elegant and incredibly destructive, meticulously hidden inside the system registry. It was designed to wait for a high-stress event, like a system launch, and then execute a total architecture collapse. But it was the payload of the code that made the blood freeze in my veins. The virus was not just designed to crash the simulation. Its primary objective, executed in the shadows while the system was panicking, was to completely wipe the financial data directories off the master servers. I dug deeper, my fingers moving silently across the keys to avoid drawing attention. I traced the digital signature of the logic bomb to find out who had planted it. The screen refreshed, displaying a timestamp and a user token. The code had been injected exactly 48 hours ago. The user identification attached to the injection was mine. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. The sudden termination, the fake cyberspace certification, the bizarre decision to replace a senior architect with a clueless teenager. It all snapped into place, forming a picture so sinister I could barely breathe. Marcus never intended for Lily to actually run the department. He needed a catastrophic failure today. He needed the financial servers wiped clean to hide something massive. And he needed a perfect, credible scapegoat to take the fall. He had used my credentials to plant the bomb, fired me right before the launch so I could not discover it, and placed his own incompetent niece at the controls. When she inevitably made a mistake and triggered the crash, he would tell the board and the federal authorities that the bitter, fired architect had committed an act of digital terrorism on her way out the door. He was going to let me go to federal prison for decades just to cover up his own crimes. On my screen, a small prompt blinked. The logic bomb had a self-destruct protocol, designed to erase its own tracks the moment the system stabilized. It was quietly deleting itself line by line, moving with desperate precision. I highlighted the remaining fragments of the original source code and copied them into an encrypted, hidden partition on my personal drive. I captured the digital ghost just seconds before it vanished into the ether. I closed the diagnostic window, clearing the screen to show only the healthy green server statuses. I turned my chair around slowly, finally looking up at Marcus. He was staring at me, a smug, arrogant smirk returning to his face, completely unaware that I had just caught him red-handed holding the murder weapon. I did not scream. I did not accuse him. I simply offered him a polite, utterly hollow smile. If he wanted to play a game of shadows, I was going to let him. I was going to keep my mouth shut, let him think he had won, and quietly weave a net so tight it would drag him straight to hell. The digital fires had barely been extinguished before Marcus began his counterattack. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the emergency was officially contained, but the political war had just begun. Sitting in my new, sprawling corner office, I intercepted a highly confidential internal memo that Marcus had quietly circulated to the executive board. He was already spinning the narrative. Instead of acknowledging the logic bomb, he was subtly shifting the blame back onto my shoulders. The memo suggested that the system crash was inevitable because the foundational architecture I had built over the last 8 years was fundamentally flawed and dangerously unstable. He recommended a full audit of my previous work and suggested that my reinstatement was a massive liability. He was laying the groundwork to have me fired a second time, but this time, he intended to attach a gross negligence lawsuit to completely destroy my career. He thought he was untouchable. I had no idea I possessed the digital ghost of his crime. But having the code was not enough. A good lawyer could argue that my credentials were used by anyone. I needed a witness. I needed the final piece of the puzzle. And the only way to get it was through the most fragile link in his chain. I picked up my desk phone and summoned Lily to my office. 5 minutes later, she hovered in my doorway, her eyes swollen and red. She looked like a prisoner walking to the execution block, fully expecting me to scream at her, fire her, or throw her to the corporate wolves. I pointed to the leather guest chair. She sat down, her hands shaking violently in her lap. I stood up, closed the heavy blinds, and locked the door. I did not yell. I did not insult her. Instead, I turned my massive curved monitor toward her and opened the encrypted drive. I walked her through the logs, explaining the malicious code in simple, clear terms. Then, I showed her the failsafe I had discovered hidden deep within the virus. I pointed directly at the screen. I told her that if the board did not believe I was a cyber terrorist, the virus was explicitly programmed to route the origin of the attack back to the specific terminal she was logged into. Marcus was not just using her to take my job. He had actively rigged the system to frame his own 19-year-old niece for a federal crime if his primary plan failed. Lily shattered. The revelation broke whatever remaining composure she had. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob uncontrollably. The raw, agonizing cries of a child who realized the monster was her own family. Through her gasps for air, the truth finally spilled out. She confessed that she never wanted to work in technology. She was studying art history. Marcus had forced her to drop out of her sophomore year of college just 3 weeks ago. He threatened to completely cut off the financial support he was providing for her mother, who was undergoing expensive medical treatments, unless Lily took this job and did exactly what she was told. He needed a puppet, someone completely ignorant of coding who would sit at the master terminal and blindly follow his fatal instructions. But then, Lily gave me a gift I could never have anticipated. Wiping her tears, she leaned in and whispered that she knew where Marcus kept his real secrets. He was too paranoid to leave his financial trails on the company cloud. She told me he kept a physical, encrypted solid-state drive locked inside a biometric safe hidden behind a modern art painting in his private office. That drive contained the ledgers of every ghost transaction and every shell company he used to launder the project funds. I looked at the terrified teenager sitting across from me. I could have easily used this information, left her to deal with the fallout, and walked away clean. But I did not see an enemy anymore. I saw a victim of the exact same corporate predator who had tried to ruin my life. I walked over, handed her a box of tissues, and told her that starting right now, she was no longer a pawn. We spent the next 6 hours locked in my office, transforming a naive intern into a highly effective inside operator. I mapped out the executive floor security grid for her. I taught her the specific blind spots of the cameras outside Marcus's office. I wrote a simple, malicious script and installed it on her phone, teaching her how to broadcast a localized freeze-frame loop to the security network just by tapping a button. We had a strict deadline. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock the next morning, where Marcus planned to formally present his fabricated evidence against me. We had to steal that hard drive right before he walked into the boardroom. The following morning, at exactly 8:15, the plan was set into motion. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I sat at my desk, my eyes glued to the live security feeds I had secretly hijacked. Lily approached Marcus's office pushing a small, rolling cleaning cart. She was playing her assigned role perfectly, adopting the persona of the clumsy, eager-to-please intern, fetching his morning coffee and clearing his trash bins. I watched her slip inside the office. She had exactly 3 minutes before Marcus was scheduled to finish his morning espresso in the executive lounge down the hall. Camera loop activated. Lily's voice whispered softly through the wireless earpiece I was wearing. On my screen, the feed inside his office froze on an empty room. I switched to the hallway camera. Lily moved swiftly. She pulled the heavy abstract painting away from the wall, revealing the steel face of the safe. We had spent the entire night reverse engineering his 4-digit passcode based on his known vanity metrics and old employee files. "Punch it in," I commanded through the microphone. Lily typed the numbers. A sharp mechanical click echoed through her microphone, followed by the soft hum of the safe opening. She reached inside and grabbed the small, black solid-state drive, slipping it deep into the pocket of her oversized cardigan. Suddenly, the hallway camera feed showed movement. Marcus was leaving the lounge early. He was striding aggressively down the corridor, heading straight for his office. "Hi is early. Get out of there right now," I hissed into the microphone. Panic erupted in her breathing. I heard the frantic sounds of the safe door slamming shut and the painting sliding back against the wall. She grabbed her microfiber cleaning cloth just as the heavy oak door swung open violently. Marcus stopped in the doorway, his eyes narrowing suspiciously at the sight of her standing near his desk. He demanded to know what she was doing loitering in his private space. Lily delivered the performance of a lifetime. She bowed her head submissively, her voice trembling with perfectly executed fear, and stammered a frantic apology about spilling raw sugar on his keyboard and wanting to clean it up before he saw it. Marcus sneered in disgust, calling her a clumsy idiot and ordering her to get out of his sight immediately. I watched the hallway monitor as Lily scurried out of the room, pushing her cart with her head down. As she walked past the blind spot of the camera, she briefly looked up toward the lens and discreetly tapped her pocket twice. We had the weapon, and Marcus had absolutely no idea he was a dead man walking. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the atmosphere inside the main executive boardroom on the 50th floor was thick enough to choke on. The torrential Seattle rain was still lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a gloomy gray pallor over the 15 powerful men and women seated around the massive mahogany table. At the head of the room, Marcus Sterling was in his element. He paced back and forth, holding a thick, perfectly bound dossier, playing the role of the outraged, protective corporate leader to absolute perfection. Sitting directly across from him, I kept my legs crossed, resting my chin on my hand. I was perfectly silent, letting the venom flow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Marcus announced, his voice vibrating with manufactured righteous anger. What we experienced yesterday was not a systemic failure. It was an act of calculated, malicious digital terrorism. When I realized Gemma Price lacked the mandatory compliance certifications, I made the difficult executive decision to terminate her employment. In retaliation, she used her residual root access to plant a highly destructive logic bomb within our core architecture. She intentionally triggered a catastrophic failure that nearly cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars in liability. He tossed the forged dossier onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, dramatic thud. "I have compiled the forensic server logs," Marcus continued, looking directly at the chief executive officer, Richard, who was sweating profusely in his chair. "The digital footprint traces entirely back to Gemma. Therefore, I am formally requesting that the board authorize immediate criminal prosecution. We need to hand this evidence over to the federal authorities and ensure she spends the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate sabotage." A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the room. The billionaire investors and board members turned their heads to look at me, their expressions twisting with absolute disgust and fury. They were fully prepared to throw me to the wolves. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Gemma?" Richard asked, his voice trembling slightly. I did not rush. I slowly uncrossed my legs and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored blazer. I walked calmly toward the front of the room, approaching the main presentation podium. Lily, acting in her new official capacity as my executive assistant, was sitting quietly in the corner, her hands resting tightly on her lap. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Marcus has painted a very compelling picture," I said, my voice smooth and echoing clearly off the glass walls. "But his dossier is missing a few critical pages. Allow me to provide the complete audit." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small, black solid-state drive that Lily had extracted from the wall safe just 45 minutes earlier, and plugged it directly into the master terminal. I bypassed the standard presentation software and opened the decrypted root directory. The massive projector screen behind Marcus suddenly flashed bright white, instantly illuminating the dark room. But instead of technical defense documents or server logs, the screen filled with an endless, scrolling spreadsheet of banking transactions. "What is this?" one of the lead investors demanded, leaning forward and squinting at the screen. "This is the actual architecture of our recent budget deficits," I explained smoothly, tapping the keyboard to highlight specific columns. "Over the past 3 years, exactly $42 million meant for hardware development has been systematically siphoned out of the corporate treasury. As you can see on the screen, these funds were rerouted through a labyrinth of phantom vendor invoices and deposited directly into offshore shell companies based in the Cayman Islands." Marcus froze. All the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a polished wax figure. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as his meticulously constructed empire began to vaporize before his eyes. "And if you are wondering who owns those shell companies," I continued, pressing the spacebar to pull up a secondary window, "this folder contains the digitized incorporation documents, bearing the unmistakable, notarized signature of our Chief Technology Officer, Marcus Sterling." The boardroom erupted. 15 different people started shouting all at once. Richard slammed his hands on the table, demanding an explanation, but I was not finished. I clicked one final file. It was an audio recording extracted from the hidden directories on the drive, heavily confirming his collusion with human resources. Marcus's own voice echoed through the speakers, instructing the Human Resources Director to fabricate the cyberspace certification rule specifically to terminate me without severance. "You set me up," I said, my voice easily cutting through the chaos of the room. You needed the system to crash, so the resulting data wipe would permanently destroy the financial servers, effectively burying your embezzlement forever. You fired me, planted a virus using my credentials, and put your completely untrained niece at the controls so you could blame the disaster on a disgruntled former employee. Marcus snapped. The polished, arrogant facade shattered completely, revealing the cornered, desperate animal underneath. His eyes darted around the room, eventually landing on the only person who could have possibly given me access to his private biometric safe. He looked at Lily. "You worthless little traitor!" Marcus roared, his face turning an explosive shade of crimson. He lunged across the front of the room, completely losing his mind, his hands reaching out to grab Lily by the throat. Lily screamed, throwing her arms up to protect her face, but Marcus never reached her. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom did not just open, they were violently thrown wide open, slamming against the drywall. 6 men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers stormed into the room. The bright yellow letters across their backs read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Federal agents, step away from the girl right now," the lead agent barked, drawing a heavy tactical baton. Marcus froze in his tracks, his hands suspended in the air. He looked wildly between the federal agents and me, completely incapable of processing how they had arrived so perfectly on time. I smiled, picking up the black conference phone resting in the center of the mahogany table. The little green light indicating an active call was blinking steadily. I dialed the Cybercrimes Division in Seattle 30 minutes before this meeting started. "Marcus, I left the phone on mute. They have been listening to your entire confession and reviewing the live screen share of your offshore bank accounts since 9 o'clock. 2 agents grabbed Marcus by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him forcefully against the glass wall. The cold, sharp click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly over the torrential rain outside. The board members sat in, stunned, breathless silence as the architect of their company's downfall was read his Miranda rights. As the agents pulled Marcus toward the door, he locked eyes with me, his face twisted in a mask of absolute hatred and defeat. I did not gloat. I did not smile in triumph. I simply walked up to him, reached into my blazer, and pulled out the deactivated plastic employee badge he had forced me to surrender yesterday. I slipped the plastic card neatly into the breast pocket of his tailored suit. "Company policy. Marcus," I whispered coldly, "you are out of compliance. We have to let you go." 6 months later, the Seattle rain had finally given way to a bright, crisp summer morning. I stood behind the desk in the corner executive suite, looking out through the glass walls overlooking the engineering floor. The plaque on my heavy oak door now permanently read, "Chief Technology Officer." Down in the main pit, I watched Lily standing in front of a massive digital whiteboard. She was not holding a binder upside down anymore. She was confidently commanding a room of 10 junior engineers, using a laser pointer to break down the nuances of our newly fortified security encryption protocols. She had found her calling, and she was brilliant at it. I took a sip of my black coffee and smiled. They always say that revenge is a dish best served cold, that you have to burn your enemies to the ground to find peace. But looking at the thriving, rebuilt ecosystem in front of me, I knew the truth. The most perfect, absolute form of revenge is not burning someone else's world to ashes. It is building an impenetrable empire where people like them never, ever have the clearance to enter. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We truly appreciate your time and support. Before you go, we would love to know where you are listening from today, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As a quick reminder, because YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, we will no longer be able to upload new videos here in the foreseeable future. We are moving all our operations to Patreon. If you found today's story satisfying and want to hear even more incredible, exclusive true revenge stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube, please help us keep this project alive by joining our Patreon community. You can scan the QR code right here on your screen, or just click the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we cannot wait to see you over there.